Are you ready? You don't have
Wait.
to. We can continue to talk like this for...
We don't have any material.
Yeah, come on up. Come on up.
Coming up, start sitting up. But
You can...
it's a real, like, I can't overstate how much of an honor it is to be introducing Sandi Metz. I don't know about you, but she has been a huge impact on my very short career by reading all of the books, watching all of the talks. We just actually in the last 6 months worked through 99 Bottles and Puda, and it's actually good to do that as a junior developer because now I am set, right? It's going to be great. And you shook my hand multiple times.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
Again. This is my programming hand. It is just, it's like this.
You don't even have to look. It just refactors code. Amazing.
Yeah. Anyway, so yes, Sandi is the author of Puda. If you haven't read it, you must. 99 Bottles is a cycling enthusiast. Bought her own bike here. Owns... Do you want to give the fact?
Owns 9 bikes.
You didn't tell me when you asked me that question.
Yeah,
you were going to bust me in front of everyone.
Yeah, but has corrected me and told me that the correct number of bikes to own is N plus 1.
My husband was there and he heard that. So we will be getting a new shed to accommodate all the new bikes I get. That's good. But yeah, no better way to kick off a RubyConf. We've wanted Sandi here since the first RubyConf all those years ago. And she's here. You're in for a treat. Welcome, Sandi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Look at this. It's such a treat to be here. You spread out well. I don't have to browbeat anybody to move. And there are some empty seats in the middle if you want to scoot in. I'm not. Nobody moved, so all right, forget that. I don't have any. Today's talk is not technical, so I don't have any code on slides, and I'm worried about you seeing it. I have 2 things to talk about before I get going. One is about sponsors. I had a big life event in my life last year, and I didn't go out the whole year. I didn't go to any conferences. And then just recently have started being able to reappear in our community. And isn't it amazing to come here and be with these people? It's like, your peers, right? It's like, we make community at these events. And I know that we have Slack and we have, there are all kinds of ways to get together online, but there's something about being together physically that cannot be reproduced by other means. And somebody made it possible for this to happen. And it wasn't me. I suck, right? I do not have the event organization gene, so I'm super grateful for the people who go to the effort to make it possible for us to be together. And one is the sponsors, right? It takes money to do this, and it's not money you paid. Somebody paid for me to come here from the US. And so they were kind enough to mention all the sponsors. Here's what I would tell you. Buy things from them. Give them money, right? Look at their job postings. Like, these are people who want to, they're the people that we want to nurture. They want to support our community. The other thing that they didn't say is, you notice it. Well, why don't you stand up? No, you've seen this shirt already today, right? I am lucky enough, there you go, thank you. Now sit back down. Like I didn't. I'm lucky enough to be staying at the hotel where the out-of-town conference organizers are, and I can report that they are borderline hysterically tired. They disguised it pretty well when they were up here on stage, maybe, perhaps, but they have been working night and day for 13 months to browbeat sponsors into giving them money and to organize this conference. I tried to get them to tell me to list all the disasters that had been averted. And they didn't really enumerate the list, but they did imply that some had been. And so not only should you buy things from the sponsors, but you should find someone in one of these shirts and shake their hand and thank them. The reason you're here is because they did it. Yeah. The other thing I'd like to say before I get started is I brought my remote, I really did. The part I left in the US was the USB dongle that allowed me to actually use it. So Nick lent me a remote, kind man. All right, so we are happy to be here. I think we've established that, right? We're super happy, but I have to say that I fear that I have to bring a thing to your attention, and it is that despite the fact that we're happy with each other and we're happy to be here, we are not completely happy in all phases of our lives. Now, I know this because after decades of writing code for a living, I wrote that book by accident. And it sort of wrecked my life. It was like a bomb went off, and now if I get paid now, I make a living by teaching short classes in OO. And so what that means about my life is that I dip in and out of different businesses with some regularity, 10 or 12 or 15 different shops a year. So I see ways in which different businesses are unhappy. I see not just the place I work, but all the places, all the ways in which they're unhappy. And I can report that programming shops are not universally happy. Yours may not be, right? So I know that because I see it. But the other thing I know, the other reason I know that there's unhappiness is because there's a study about it. This one. It was published last summer. They say it's on the distribution and causes of programmer unhappiness. And here's what they did. These guys, there are 4 of them. I can't pronounce some of their names, so I'm not even going to bother to try here. Let me get that out of the way. So here's what they did. They went to GitHub and they harvested 500,000 email addresses. And from that 500,000, they randomly selected 33,000. They sent out surveys and 1,300 people responded. They had this back and forth about ways in which you might be unhappy about your job, and they identified 219 specific and unique ways to be unhappy. And they coded them. All right? So once they identified those, they corresponded with those people again, and they asked them to mark which of those codes, which codes applied to their unhappiness, and they got back 2,280 references to code, about 10 references to each unhappiness code. But of course, the distribution wasn't normal, right? It actually turned out that these are the top 10 reasons for programmer unhappiness. Notice that this accounts for about 1/3 of the total unhappiness. And it's fairly predictable, right? Being stuck is number one. I found that sort of interesting. I kind of like that feeling of being stuck, right? But maybe that's not universal. So time pressure, yeah, we hate that. Bad code quality. Underperforming colleague, I thought that was super interesting. Like, what if someone else in your shop also got the survey? Would they have called you underperforming, right? Is there like circular firing Scott here? Feelings of inadequacy, mundane or repetitive task. I thought that was interesting too. I'll get back to that. So bad code, bad decision making, blah, 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 blah. They notice the authors categorize these things as either internal or external. Now, I agree that the internal reasons for unhappiness are important, but they are not about, my talk is not about them today, so I'm just going to get rid of it. All right, and now let's come back to that one about boring or mundane task. You know, I just don't buy that that's an external problem. It feels like it's an internal problem, right? Like a boring task is an opportunity to write a really fun script. So I'm just gonna toss that too. So we're left with these 6, right? These 6 that are all external. And when you look at them, I think they're all caused by the same underlying problem. And that problem is other people. Other people can be so annoying. Like you can look at this list, you probably already have ideas about how to avoid these problems, right? But other people do things that roll downhill and cause pain on you. If only they would behave the way you want them to behave, everything would be better. And so, if despite your best efforts, you're in a situation where other people are causing you problems, I see this as a problem of persuasion. And now is the time for me to confess that I have a degree in psychology, and that this is something from which one never recovers. So when I see people, my psychology degree has shaped the way I think about the world. And when I see people who are unhappy because they can't come to an agreement, I see failures of persuasion. And this makes me sad because this shouldn't be a problem. Humans are hardwired to get along. We come primed to be persuadable. Early humans were weak and soft in a world that was hard and scary, and the groups of humans that did best at collaboration were the ones that lived to reproduce. This is evolution at work, right? We as a species arose out of an environment that selected us for cooperation. There's a ton of research about this. There's a lot of information out there about ways in which people are persuadable, and I'm going to take you through a couple of points of view that will describe how you could be more persuasive. The first perspective is from this guy. His name is Robert Cialdini. He's a psych professor at a bunch of universities in the States, and he wrote this book, Influence. It's about the psychology of persuasion. This book has sold 3 million copies, I have a book. It will not sell 3 million copies. Like this is an astounding number of books. All right. So what he does is he looks at the research about persuasion, about humans and persuasion, and he categorizes, he groups all the ways in which we're persuadable into 6 categories, and he makes up 6 rules. This is the entire book is about these rules, and I'm going to go through all 6 of the rules and explain them to you. All right. The first rule is about reciprocity. And so this rule states that if I give you something or help you in any way, that you are obligated to return the favor. And it also says that if I attempt to do you a favor, you have to take it. You can't refuse it. Right? It also says that if I do you a favor, I can ask for a favor in return that's bigger than the favor you gave me. And it also says that I can ask for a favor in return before you offer. That's what the reciprocity rule says. It's really interesting from an evolutionary point of view, because what it does is it saddles people with a future obligation. And it also means that I can give something away, space by my fire or safety or shelter, without losing it. Right? And so you can see how that would be super adaptive, evolutionary. The rule is so strong that it can easily be used against you. For example, is this a thing? Did you ever have this in Australia? Does anybody know who this is? Hare Krishnas, yeah. So it wasn't clear to me whether I should change this slide, because I didn't know if you would know this, but I'll go through it. Probably you do. All right. So these guys are members of the Hare Krishna. I hesitate to say, well, it's a religious group, and they have baskets of flowers. And here's what they're doing. In the 80s in the U.S., you could not go into an airport without being accosted by someone dressed in orange who wanted to give you a flower. It was very difficult to refuse the flower once they caught you. After they gave you the flower, after they forced the flower upon you, they asked for a donation. It was very difficult to refuse to give the donation. In the 80s, we would walk around airports in the U.S. trying desperately not to make eye contact with a Hare Krishna, right? And so you didn't want the flower, you tried to refuse the flower. Once they caught you, it was very difficult to get out of, given a donation. It turned out that, and then what I would do with the flower, like everybody, you just throw it away around the next corner because you didn't really want it. And it turned out the Krishnas really understood that they were abusing this rule, because part of the Krishna team involved having someone assigned to go get flowers out of trash cans so that they could recycle them and foist them upon the next folk. Okay, it was super effective as a fundraising technique and extremely offensive to the people who were victim to it, so much so that the Port Authority of New York City brought a legal case against them that went all the way to the Supreme Court in the United States that banned soliciting like this in public spaces in America. So it was a big deal. It really worked, and we hated having it used against us. That's the reciprocity rule. The next rule, rule number 2, is about consistency. We have a strong internal desire to be consistent with our past statements, to be consistent with our own self-image. If you make people make a visible commitment, like say something out loud or write it down, it makes them even more likely to want to appear to be consistent with that thing later. This is why it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting, right? It turns out if you force people to behave in certain ways, like to engage in a debate where they defend points of view that they don't hold, they will their points of view will shift to adopt those points of view. It's like it is not true that you can't legislate morality. You absolutely can. If you make people behave in certain ways, they'll start adopting those ideas. Just like the reciprocity rule, this is super useful. It's very adaptive for human beings, but it can also be used against us. Some of you, if you're a parent, you may be familiar with this phenomena. In the fall, around November, ads start appearing on the Saturday morning cartoons. And they are for the cool new toy that every kid wants at Christmas. And your child asks you for that toy, and you promise them that you will get it for them. And then you go to the stores, and they're not available anywhere. You can't find them. And so you buy your kids something else. And then the holidays pass. The ads reappear in the stores. The ads reappear on Saturday morning cartoons. Your child says, "Hey, get me that thing you promised me you don't have." And you're like, "I already got you Christmas." And your kid says, "But you promised." And what do? You know what you do if you're a parent. The parents can all tell us, right? You can't even go buy the toy. All right? This is a deliberate attempt by toy manufacturers to spread their sales cycle out for a longer period of time. And it exploits the consistency rule. The third rule is about social proof. Social proof rule says if I'm uncertain about what to do, I'll take my cue from others. If they're doing it, it must be okay to do it. If they're not doing it, probably I should avoid it. Super handy for when you don't have enough information, also can go badly wrong. A simple example of this, I use the social proof rule all the time. I am a cyclist, and it is common on a long ride in the bush to be somewhere absent facilities, shall we say. I can promise you, no matter how long it's been since you've seen a car, if you get off your bike and walk off into the woods, traffic starts going by. That's what happens. And if you have a bunch of friends in colorfully dressed cycling outfits standing beside the road, all the cars that come by turn and look at them. This could turn out badly, right? But it turns out there's a way. I have absolute ability to control the gaze of passersby in vehicles. I can absolutely do it. It's as simple as this. You just tell all your friends beside the road to stare fixedly in the opposite direction. And you can watch it when the cars go by. The cars come up, all the heads turn, and then all the heads turn and look in the direction of their gaze. Totally works, social proof. This is why if you're in a building and a fire alarm goes off, you should leave. Don't look around at all the other people trying to figure out what to do, right? It needs someone to take action in groups where responsibility is diffused. Social proof, okay. Sorry, should have done that. Not wrong remote. Should I just say that again, like direction of gaze of passerbys? You get the joke, right? Sorry, shoot me now. All right, the next one's about authority. We tend to give people authority. We do what authorities say even when we don't know, right? We yield to their judgment. There's two kinds of authority. There's the kind that's embodied by people in uniforms, right? This is like do what I say authority. There's also a kind of authority that we use a lot in our community. It's called expert authority, right? I learned TDD, for example, because people I thought were smarter than me told me it was a good idea. And believe me, I sucked at it. Like I went from being someone who thought of myself as a good programmer to someone who got absolutely nothing done from one day to the next when I started trying to do TDD. There's a way in which we learn by cargo culting, right? We learn by doing the wrong thing. We learn because people we think are smarter than us tell us to try things we don't know how to do, which often we're not successful at. And then in theory, if they really are authorities and they're right, we get better, which is definitely what happened to me for TDD. But there are lots of things we don't have enough information to make good judgments about on our own, and we trust authorities for those things. The fifth rule is about liking. If people like you, it turns out that they're more likely to do as you want. Now, I know you're probably kind of having that experience about liking, but liking is super interesting. From a psychology point of view, like, why does liking exist? What purpose does it serve? Like, do amoeba have best friends? I don't think so, right? And so it turns out that we're inclined to like people who are similar to us, and we're inclined to like people with whom we've had prior positive interactions. Liking is linked, unsurprisingly, to trust, and that trust is about reciprocity. It goes back to the first rule, right? I think liking suggests that you can build relationships where you will have total safety. It'll make the whole group safer overall because you'll have reciprocal behaviors. You can do things without giving them away. This is why the power of the liking rule explains why, you know that feeling when you meet somebody and they're overly friendly and it's kind of creepy? You know, like where you're having that, I didn't know we were this good of friends kind of reaction to something. It's because liking implies, it feels like you're entering into an implicit bargain that you reciprocate, you'll do something for them later. That's why overly friendly people make you feel so creepy. It's like you feel like there's a bargain maybe that you don't want to fulfill. All right, the last CLD one is about scarcity. One way to persuade people that they want something is to suggest that it's going away. This is why Amazon tells you there's only 7 left, right? It's to up the value of something. Scarcity is a powerful motivation for us, and it adds value to surprising things. For example, it is not your imagination that when you're waiting for someone to vacate a parking place, that they go extra slowly. It's not. The research about this, if you ask the drivers who are leaving if your waiting has an effect on them, they report that they're hurrying. They report that they're hustling out of their space because they know you're waiting. But if you actually measure it, it turns out that they've slowed down. All right? Your waiting makes the scarce parking place more valuable, and it makes them more reluctant to depart it. The only way you can make them go even slower is to, of course, blow your horn. And if you think about it in terms of scarcity, it makes perfect sense, right? Every cue you're giving them is you're assigning the value to the space. And they are more, the higher the value you assign it, the harder it is for them to leave it. So scarcity. All right, so that was Cialdini. Here are his rules. Now, each of those rules, reciprocity, these seem like triumphs of human nature to me. It seems like the best of us, that these things are, that we find hardwired into the human species, these rules. But Cialdini calls them in this book, he refers to them as weapons. I hated this book. I absolutely hated it. Let me read you a couple quotes. He's talking about these things as weapons of influence. Their strength is in the nearly mechanical process by which the power within these weapons can be activated, and the consequent exploitability of this power by anyone who knows how to trigger them. Here's another one. The great advantage of these weapons is that not only they work, but also that they are virtually undetectable. It's true, they're hardwired. Stimulus leads to response, right? If you're aware of the rules, you can use them to your advantage. If you're not aware of the rules, you should probably not be allowed to go buy a car by yourself. So I love these qualities in us as people, and I really hate the idea of having them be, in a non-transparent way, being used against me to persuade me to do something against my will. And so after I looked, I wanted to talk about persuasion in this talk, and this was the best research I could find, but once I read it, I went looking for something else. And I got here with this guy. Does anybody know who that is? Yeah, I wonder. It's never clear to me. I bet you'll know the name. Do you know that book? Yeah? That's Dale Carnegie from the days of black and white. And the book is How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I had never read it. It's super famous. Is it as famous here? Some of you had heard of it, right? It's as famous here as it is in the States. So it's one of those things that I'd been hearing about forever, all my life, really, that I'd never read. And so I went there next. And I'm just going to give you the super quick summary of this. Well, the one thing that this book, Carnegie's method, is based around the idea that you can change others by changing yourself. That's his fundamental point. And once I heard that, I liked it better already. It gave me some hope, right? That there was some way to be more open and transparent in my attempts to persuade people. And so this book, you could read the book if you want, but you can just look at what I'm going to do. He breaks everything into 4 categories, and at the end of every category, there's a list of bullet points that summarize it. And I'm just going to print all those bullet points out for you and talk underneath them. We'll just let them run. The first section of the book is about how to make people like you. All right? Here's what you have to do if you want people to like you. Names. We already talked about names this morning. Listening. Oh, no. Talk about them if you have to talk. Be sincere. Sincerity is a big key for him. All right. So that's how to make people like you. I promise you, if you did those things to me, I would like you. It would totally work, right? You can completely see it. All right. His next category is how to handle people. This category only has 3 things in it. Here they are. Again, sincerity. This arouse an eager one. It's interesting. That sort of goes back to the consistency principle. Like I want to label people as something. I want to say that they want something, so that then they'll have to live up to that. All right. So that would totally work. Winning people over. This is the longest one. There are 12 things in this category, and this one goes more directly to persuadability. Don't get in arguments. Don't say you're wrong. Admit it. That's a hard one. Don't start mad. All right? Find some way to agree with them. Again, let them talk. It's not about us. Agree that their point of view is correct. Assume that they have good motives. Try to be interesting. throw down a challenge again. It's about describe in some way, right? You're a civic-minded kind of person. Perhaps you'll help me get out the vote, right? It works. Like research says it works. Okay, so those are the ways. If you did those things, they would absolutely work. You can see now, this is the final category. It's got 9 things in it. It's about leadership. While you read these, I want you to imagine if you're a boss, imagine what would happen in your shop if you behaved in this way. If you have a boss, imagine how you'd feel if your boss did these things. This is what Carnegie says it means to be a leader. It was somewhere about here when I was reading this book that I started feeling like that perhaps I wasn't a good enough person. So, makes you do a little soul searching, huh? You should read the book if you haven't read it. It really is worth reading. When I first read it, I talked to, you may know, I don't know if you know who this is. This is Sharon. She's on the board of Ruby Central in the U.S. I told her that I was reading this book for a talk I was putting together, and she had read it. She offered me a 1-sentence synopsis. Here's what she said. Act as if others are interesting, and you will eventually find them so. And I thought that was actually just about perfect. However, I would add one thing to it. The basic premise of Carnegie is that changing other people, changing their minds, persuading them to things is not about them. It's about you. All right, so that's it. Carnegie. Make them like you, be respectful, win them over, be a leader. If you want them to behave differently, start out by changing your own behavior. Behave differently yourself. All right, so back to this. You may have forgotten now that we're unhappy. That's how this all started. And then, of course, it's because of other people. And now we've been through, if it is true, it stands to reason, logically, it appears that we would all be happier if they would just change their behavior. If we could make them be different, everybody would be improved. And so Cialdini, there's 2 ways that we could try to make people behave differently. We got Cialdini, where we could use the weaponized persuasion, right? You could go on a military-style campaign and sort of non-transparently, deceitfully get them to behave differently. It would probably work. It would probably work. Or you could try Carnegie's, right? If that didn't appeal to you, you could do this. The Carnegie stuff is based on opinion rather than research, but you can see already, looking at those categories, how much it overlaps with the actual research. His advice has lasted, it's in the 80th anniversary edition because his advice works. It absolutely does. And yet now it's time to confess something. All of this, everything I've said so far in this talk, makes one basic assumption that is perhaps incorrect. It assumes that you're right. We're assuming that everything would be better if I could persuade everyone else to behave the way I want them to behave. And that might be incredibly wrong. Like, what if I'm not right? How do you know? Maybe everything would be better if you were the one that got persuaded, right? What if you're wrong? These are questions I have to ask myself all the time. What if I'm wrong about TDD? What if I'm wrong about small objects? What if I'm wrong about how people ought to collaborate? If that's true, then if I'm convincing enough to get people to do things my way, then everything will get worse. So it would be great, like I wish we had facts. If we had facts, I believe that in the modern world there's still a place for facts, that we can agree that there are some universal facts, and that we are, especially us as a group, we are persuadable by facts. That if someone could prove to me that it was good to have big classes rather than small ones, I hope that I would accept that as truth and go write big classes. The problem is in tech, very often we have no measurable science to defend our points of view. We have our past experience, and we just think it would be better. I just tell people, like, I can't prove it to you, but I think I'm right and you're wrong and you should do things my way. And this is not a winning argument. I can promise you, right? So what I find very often is people have there's no way to judge who's right. And also, if you do like I do, and you dip into these shops and you watch the sometimes really terrible arguments like team wrecking arguments that are going on. What I find very often when I come in from the outside is they're having a problem with ends versus means. And so when I see these big conflicts on teams, one of two things must be true. Either the people with whom you disagree are evil and their intent is to destroy your software. That's one thing, right? That they have malicious motivations. Or it's possible that they have the same lofty goals as you do, and they simply have chosen different means to achieve them. And there's a big difference between those point of views, right? We may be much more alike than we are different, but you would not know that by the strength and desperation of the arguments I see. I think that we're more alike than we are different, and I believe that not only because I believe that we have a common set of worthy goals. I believe in your good intentions. And not only do I believe in your good intentions, but I also know what motivates you. And there's research about this. This guy, Daniel Pink, wrote a book called Drive back in 2010 that was about motivations. Why do humans do work? He worked for MIT. What he did was he made up a bunch of tasks, games, shooting a ball through a hoop, putting widgets together, all kinds of stuff like that. And he incentivized people with pay for performance. And so you would make a little bit of money if you did the bottom level. If you did a little bit of good, you'd get a medium kind of money. If you did a medium amount of good, you'd get a lot of money if you did really good. And here were the results of his study, his research. As long as the task involved strictly, if you do this, then you get that things. Building widgets, picking things up and putting them in another box. Mechanical stuff, as long as the task was purely mechanical, bonuses worked. Higher pay led to higher performance. But as soon as any task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, higher bonuses led to worse performance. And this study is not one of those stupid studies that can't be replicated. It is not fallen apart. It has been replicated in all kinds of ways, at all kinds of universities, under all kinds of environments. It is an absolute fact that for the work that we do, money does not work as an incentive. Now, it's not true that money is not an incentive, right? We know that it is, but what it turns out is you have to pay enough. Once you pay enough so that you take money off the table, it turns out that other things explain our motivations. And so Pink found three things. There are three different ideas that determine whether or not people are motivated. This is what we want. There are three drives. The first one is the drive for autonomy. We have a powerful desire to be self-directed. We want to choose how we do our work. This is why children grow up and leave home, right? They would never go, they have a pretty cush life when they're babies, but they're super, super motivated to be in control of their destinies. It's hardwired into us. The next thing is we want to get good at stuff, mastery. We spend enormous amounts of time trying to get better at things that have meaning only to us. The third thing is purpose. We want work that matters. I looked for a picture in Australia. This is actually, for those of you who haven't done this, you probably don't recognize it. This young man is on the roof of a house on a cold morning in Dallas, Texas, at a habitat build, Habitat for Humanity. And I looked for local habitat photos. Apparently you do have a habitat chapter here, but I couldn't find a Sydney or AU picture. But I tell you what, if you wanted to go bang nails for habitat, just look them up. There's a way to do it. Purpose. He's building someone a house. All right? So here we go. We crave for control of our lives. We yearn to get better at things, and we hunger for work that has meaning. These are the things that motivate us, and if you think about it, they perfectly explain open source software. This is why we do it. So, if we agree that other people's motivations are as honorable as our own, then conflicts between us are due to differences about strategy. They're about differences about means and not ends. If we desire the same ends but have simply chosen different means, it may be that the real insufficiency is not about persuadability but one of understanding. Maybe instead of trying to persuade them to do things our way, we'd be best served if we got better at collaboration. We need to improve not only our ability to influence, but to be influenced. And that leads me to teamwork. Studies show that groups innovate faster. They respond to mistakes more quickly. People are happier when they work on teams. They achieve better results. They report higher satisfaction. But teams, of course, involve people. And people, we've already decided, are the source of a lot of our unhappiness. And persuading them to do things our way might not fix it. And so instead of asking how we can be more persuasive, perhaps what we should be asking is, how can we make better teams? And Google asked that question. They have a lot of teams, and they're really good at data, and it matters to them that they put together good teams. And back in 2012, they started something called Project Aristotle. Their intent was to study hundreds of teams at Google and identify teams that were high performing, figure out what it was about those teams that made them high performing, and so that they could reproduce it everywhere. They're good at data, and they looked at the data 9 ways from Sunday. They looked at all their teams, the composition of their teams, and the output of their teams, and they could not find anything that would explain the success of the teams. There was nothing about the individual people on the teams that could be used to explain whether or not teams were efficient and effective or not, or failures. It turned out they figured out some things that did not matter, some people think these things matter. Like personality type doesn't matter. Whether you socialize with them out of work doesn't matter. Whether you're all the same doesn't matter. Whether you have team members that have a lot of experience doesn't matter. Right? None of those things matter. You can have good teams or bad teams that are mixtures where all those things vary. And as they were struggling to figure out what it was that made teams successful, to identify the thing that made teams successful, they came up on this idea in psychology about group norms. So it turns out there's this idea that groups can develop an identity. They evolve an identity that is separate from the identity of any individual in the group. And when they went down that path, it seemed like that might matter. It felt like it was something about the teams. But then when they started looking at what norms the groups had evolved, what they found was some groups had norms that were really at odds with other groups, right? So they thought it might be something about the quality of the group rather than the quality of the individuals, but they couldn't identify what that quality was. And then they stumbled upon some research done by other people about this is back in 2012, when this idea started arising. The notion that a group could have an IQ that was distinct from the IQ of any individual in the group. And when they started looking at group success along the emotional intelligence of groups, they started seeing if there was any correlation between successful teams and their emotional intelligence. They figured it out. They absolutely identified the one quality that a team had to have in order to be successful. If you have this quality, I can predict that you'll be successful. If you don't have this quality, you will not be. And that the single thing that matters about teams is how members treat one another. That's all there is to it. And there are two specific behaviors that they identified. One is what, because they're psychologists, they called equality and distribution of turn-taking, conversational turn-taking. This just means how much people talk, right? It turns out that if members of a team speak approximately equal to the same amount of time, then emotional intelligence of the team is high. I have a quote for you here. They say, as long as everyone gets a chance to talk, the team did well. This is across the period of a day, not in every meeting. But if one person or a small group spoke all the time, the collective intelligence declined. Consider the teams you're on and think about how conversational turn-taking works. All right, so the next thing was this idea of average social sensitivity. This is just whether or not you can infer how someone else feels with unspoken cues. Can you look at them and tell whether they feel comfortable based on their body language? Being able to do this, I know there's some hardwiring about this, but it also is a matter of intent. Like being able to look at other people and pick up unspoken cues about how they feel is partly based on whether or not you care to do so, whether you've cared to learn that skill. And I totally acknowledge that skill is not, it's not this easy for everybody, but it is still a thing that you can learn if you feel like it's important. And so these two factors, conversational turn-taking and average social sensitivity, they're part of a larger quality that psychologists call psychological safety. Psychological safety is a group culture where members have a shared belief that their team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. It's a sense of confidence that the team won't embarrass or reject or punish you for speaking up. It describes a climate of mutual respect where people are comfortable being themselves. Now, this psychological safety is not the only important thing, right? You have to have a culture of accountability. You have to know what your job is. I mean, the sort of normal businessy things still apply. But it turns out that that this quality, this single quality of psychological safety is the most critical element in making any team successful. It's the key thing that makes teams work. And making your team safe starts with you. You set the tone. You can set the tone of the next conversation. And in these conversations, words matter. Words about the past are often about blame, and they are best avoided. Words about the future are about taking corrective action. They're about improving what comes next. When faced with conflict, it's okay to have strong opinions, but they should be weakly held. Have an identity, but keep it small. Don't get wrapped in a straitjacket of commitment to some idea you've had in the past. If you think back on Carnegie's suggestions, they were so open-hearted and forward-looking. And they're the kinds of things that would make a team safe. They would make your team psychologically safe, but somehow we're not always able to do them. What prevents us from sincerely trying to make them like us, from winning them over, from being a leader? Why do we fail to trust their intentions, to believe in their motivations, to make a safe place? Consider this. If during a heated argument, someone accused you of being purple, you'd probably say something like, well, tell me more about that. Like, you wouldn't have a strong reaction because you're not secretly afraid that you're purple. You are not your code. You're not your past. You're not your parents. And you are not responsible for everything. If you pop the why can't we come to an agreement stack all the way down, deep there in the bottom of the well, you come to fear. And I know this because I'm afraid, and I believe that you are too. But I also know something else. Fear is just the background noise of our lives. You can't escape it, but it needn't define you. It doesn't matter. Fear does not matter, because despite it, within it, and alongside it, you are also good enough. I feel a need to repeat that. I stand here and I look at you and I can see that you are good enough. Hear me. Put that burden down. Your past need not dictate your future. Now, I want to acknowledge some situations are so insane that you should leave them. I'm not saying that you should stay, but when the problem is communication rather than pathology, the most efficient way to change everybody else's future is by changing yourself. If you want to achieve your purpose, learn the tools of persuasion, and then use your newfound powers to make your team more psychologically safe. We are hardwired to work together, and a good team is always better than any single individual. To build the best team, go now and learn to be your best self. Thank you. Okay, I wrote that book. Oh, I wrote that. I think they already turned me off. Okay, I wrote that book. I wrote this book. I have that. There's stickers up here. If you want stickers, come get them. Thank you.
Wasn't that amazing? Sandi Metz, everyone.
Wow. Wow, just wow.
Someone told me that would be emotional, and I didn't believe them until the end.
I felt it.
It is good to finally have the validation too that I'm always right, and the source of all of my problems is everyone else.
Yeah.